In the scorching summer of 1941, the Romanian Royal Air Force stood at a crossroads of destiny. The engines of the Fortel Air and Regale, Royal Romanian, roared to life across dusty grass-covered airfields. Bound by treaty and a hunger to reclaim lost lands, they prepared to strike the Soviet colossus. The air was thick with the scent of high-octane fuel and the nervous energy of young pilots. Romania's strategic importance was not just in its men, but in its dark, flowing black gold. The oil fields of Ploești fueled the entire Axis war machine, making Romanian skies a primary target. Protecting these refineries was a task of national survival that fell upon the shoulders of the airmen. Without these pilots, the panzers of the Eastern Front would have ground to a frozen, oily halt. The inventory of the Romanian Air Force was a fascinating, chaotic mosaic of international aviation. French Potez bombers sat wing to wing with German Heinkels and sleek Italian-designed Savoia Marchettis. This diverse fleet required mechanics who were more like magicians, fixing engines with no spare parts. Despite the logistical nightmare, this international legion took to the skies to face the unknown. At the heart of this story is the IAR-80, a fighter born from the rugged spirit of the Carpathian Mountains. Designed in the factories of Brasov, it was a sleek monoplane that defied the limitations of a medium power. It was the ultimate symbol of Romanian engineering, a low-wing beauty that could dance in the clouds. When the first prototypes took flight, the world realized Romania was no longer an observer of history. Engineer Ion Grosu looked at his creation, the IAR-80, knowing it had to be both fast and lethal. Though powered by a licensed French engine, the airframe was aerodynamically cleaner than many global rivals. It featured a retractable landing gear and an enclosed cockpit, luxuries many early war pilots lacked. It was a plane built for the defense of the homeland, ready to spill blood over the Bessarabian plains. As the invasion of the Soviet Union began, the IAR-80 pilots were the first to cross the border. Over the city of Odessa, the Romanian fighters met the Soviet I-16s in a swirling, deadly ballet. The agility of the Romanian design shocked the VVS pilots, who expected an easy victory over a minor power. Tracers cut through the morning mist as the first Soviet bombers fell to the guns of the IAR-80. The IAR-80 wasn't just a machine. It was a source of immense national pride for every citizen. In the streets of Bucharest, news of aerial victories boosted the morale of a population caught in war. The radial engine's growl became a familiar sound, a promise that the skies were still under their control. But beneath the pride, the pilots knew that the Soviet Air Force was a sleeping giant beginning to wake. As the war intensified, the IAR-80 evolved into the IR-81, a heavy-hitting dive bomber variant. Engineers reinforced the wings and added bomb racks to transform the nimble fighter into a predator. It was designed to strike Soviet troop concentrations and armor with the precision of a hawk. The transition from air superiority to ground attack showed the versatility of the Brasov design. The IAR-81 pilots faced a different kind of terror as they dove toward the Earth at high speeds. With dive brakes deployed, the aircraft screamed towards Soviet bunkers through a wall of flak. Every mission was a gamble against gravity and the intense anti-aircraft fire of the Red Army. Yet, the accuracy of these Romanian dive bombers turned the tide in dozens of local skirmishes. While the IAR fighters held the line, Germany began supplying the legendary Messerschmitt Bf-109. The Emil variants arrived first, bringing the combat experience of the Battle of Britain to Romania. Romanian pilots had to quickly adapt to the 109's narrow landing gear and high-torque takeoffs. It was a more temperamental beast than the IAR, but its speed was an undeniable advantage. The arrival of the Bf-109 changed the tactical landscape for the Romanian elite squadrons. These pilots were trained by Luftwaffe veterans, learning the finger four formation and high-speed tactics. The camouflage shifted to the mottled gray and green of the German style, but the yellow crosses remained. In the hands of an ace, the Messerschmitt became a scalpel, cutting through Soviet formations with ease. By 1943, the skies over Romania were no longer just a local battlefield. They were a strategic front. Massive American bomber streams began to appear on the horizon, targeting the oil of Ploești. The IR-80 pilots looked up at the hundreds of B-24 Liberators and realized the scale had changed. No longer were they fighting individual yaks. They were fighting an industrial titan from across the sea. The defense of the refineries was a desperate, daily struggle known as the battle for the oil. Romanian pilots dove through their own anti-aircraft, fire to reach the bellies of the flying fortresses. The American .50 caliber machine guns created a literal wall of lead that the Romanians had to pierce. Many IR-80s returned with their fabric shredded and engines smoking, held together by sheer luck. During these raids, the IR-80's limitations began to show against the heavy American escorts. The P-38 Lightnings and P-51 Mustangs were faster and carried more firepower than the aging IAR. Yet, the Romanian pilots refused to stay grounded, taking off even as bombs fell on their runways. They were the shield of the nation, fighting a battle that seemed impossible to win. To bolster the defense, the Germans sent the Bf 109 G6, the famous Gustav, to Romania. This was the peak of piston engine technology, equipped with heavy 20mm cannons in the nose. Romanian aces like Cantacuzino took to the Gustav like a fish to water, scoring kills daily. The Gustav gave them the power to climb above the bombers and dive at speeds the Americans feared. Captain Constantine Cantacuzino became the face of Romanian aerial defiance during the war. A former racing pilot, his skill in the cockpit of a Bf 109 was nothing short of legendary. He survived hundreds of sorties, outmaneuvering both Soviet yaks and American Mustangs alike. His story is the story of the Romanian Air Force, skilled, daring, and surviving against all odds. While the fighters drew the glory, the twin-engine Bf 110 destroyers played a grimmer role. These heavy fighters were used as bomber hunters, packing enough punch to down a B-24 in one pass. However, their lack of maneuverability made them easy targets for the nimble American escort fighters. The Bf 110 crews lived on a knife's edge, knowing that one mistake meant a fiery end in the clouds. On the Eastern Front, the Romanian Air Force operated as a vital arm of the Axis advance. From the snowy plains of Stalingrad to the mountains of the Caucasus, Romanian planes were present. They provided the eyes for the infantry, flying reconnaissance missions in the flying pencil Dorniers. Without the aerial intelligence from the Romanians, the ground commanders would have been blind. The Dornier Do-17 was a relic of the early war, but its slim profile made it hard to hit. Romanian crews flew these flying pencils deep into Soviet territory to photograph troop movements. They were often unescorted, relying on the pilot's skill and the aircraft's speed to survive. Each mission was a silent, lonely trek over miles of enemy territory where one engine failure meant death. For heavy striking power, Romania relied on the German-supplied Heinkel He-111 medium bombers. The glass-house nose provided the bombardier with a perfect view of the burning Soviet rail yards. Romanian Heinkels flew both day and night, dropping tons of ordnance on the Red Army's logistics. The roar of their twin Jumo engines became a herald of destruction for those on the ground. However, the Heinkel 111 was slow and vulnerable to the increasingly modern Soviet fighter screen. Romanian bomber crews had to fly in tight formations, relying on their defensive guns for survival. The casualty rates among the bomber squadrons began to climb as the Soviet Air Force reorganized. Yet the missions continued, fueled by the desperate need to halt the Soviet counteroffensives. Italy's contribution to the Romanian fleet came in the form of the Savoie Marchetti SM-79. This three-engine bomber was a strange sight, made largely of wood, plywood, and fabric. Despite its fragile construction, the Sparvero was loved by Romanian crews for its reliability. It could fly back to base with 2 engines dead and half its tail missing from anti-aircraft fire. The SM-79s were used extensively in the maritime role, patrolling the vast reaches of the Black Sea. They hunted Soviet shipping and submarines that threatened the Axis supply lines to the Crimea. The sight of the 3-engine hunchback over the waves was a comfort to Romanian sailors below. It was a testament to how Romania used every tool available to secure its maritime borders. As the war turned against the Axis, Romania began to press captured Soviet planes into service. The Polikarpov I-16, nicknamed the Rada, was a frequent prize found on overrun Soviet airfields. Romanian pilots would paint the yellow Michael's cross over the Red Star and take them up. These ghosts were used for training and local defense, a practical solution to aircraft shortages. Seeing a captured Yaksevan in Romanian colors was a surreal experience for many frontline troops. These modern Soviet fighters were evaluated by Romanian engineers to find their hidden weaknesses. Some were even used in combat, causing confusion among Soviet pilots who didn't expect to see their own. This was the Scavengers' War, where every flyable airframe was a precious asset to be used. The Junkers Ru-87 Stuka remained the most feared ground attack aircraft in the Romanian arsenal. With its inverted gull wings and fixed gear, it was an unmistakable silhouette of aerial terror. Romanian Stuka pilots perfected the art of the vertical dive, screaming toward the earth at 500 kilometers per hour. The Jericho trumpet sirens wailed, striking fear into the hearts of Soviet tank commanders below. The Stuka was a precision instrument, able to drop a bomb into a tank hatch from thousands of feet. Romanian squadrons provided close air support for the infantry during the brutal battles of 1942. But the Stuka was slow, a sitting duck for any Soviet fighter that could get behind it. The Stuka pilots relied entirely on their fighter escorts to keep the sky clear during their dives. As the Red Army advanced, the Romanian Air Force was pushed into a defensive fire brigade role. Every available plane was sent to stop the massive T-34 tank columns crossing the Dniester River. This was where the Hinchel HS-129, the flying can opener, proved its worth to the Romanian pilots. It was a specialized tank killer, armored like a bunker and armed with a massive 30mm cannon. Flying the HS-129 was like wrestling a tank through the air. It was heavy, slow, and difficult to see out of. The cockpit was so narrow that the pilot's shoulders touched the armored sides of the fuselage. Romanian pilots flew just feet above the ground, hiding in the terrain to surprise Soviet armor. One well-placed shot from the Henschel could blow the turret off a Soviet tank in an instant. Despite the Henchel's power, its French engines were notoriously unreliable and weak. If one engine was damaged, the plane became nearly impossible to keep in the air at low altitude. Romanian crews worked tirelessly to keep these specialized machines operational under field conditions. The HS-129 became a symbol of the desperate, high-stakes combat of the war's middle years. Logistics became the greatest enemy of the Royal Romanian Air Force as the years dragged on. Maintaining a fleet of French, German, Italian, and indigenous planes was an impossible puzzle. Mechanics often had to machine their own parts or scavenge them from crashed aircraft in no man's land. Their ingenuity kept planes in the air that should have been grounded months ago. The harsh winters of the Eastern Front were as deadly as the Soviet fighters they faced. Engines had to be heated with open fires just to get the oil flowing enough to start. Romanian ground crews suffered in the sub-zero temperatures to ensure their pilots had a chance. The bond between the man in the cockpit and the man with the wrench was forged in the snow. By late 1943, the American tidal wave raids had turned Ploești into a landscape of fire and smoke. The Romanian Air Force was now fighting a two-front air war, Soviets in the east, Americans in the west. The strain on the pilots was immense, with some flying 3 or 4 combat sorties every single day. Exhaustion became a silent killer, claiming as many pilots as enemy machine guns did. Yet, in this crucible of fire, the Romanian aces continued to build their incredible scores. Men like Alexandru Urbanescu became national heroes, known for their bravery and tactical brilliance. Urbanescu led his group with a follow-me attitude, always taking the most dangerous position. His death in 1944 was a blow to the heart of the nation, marking the beginning of the end. The American P-51 Mustang eventually ended the dominance of the Romanian Bf-109s. The Mustang's range and high-altitude performance made the defense of the oil fields a suicide mission. Even the most skilled Romanian pilots found themselves outnumbered 10-1 in every engagement. The sky over Bucharest was filled with the silver glint of thousands of Allied aircraft. In August 1944, the geopolitical landscape shifted in a way no one could have predicted. King Michael's coup saw Romania suddenly break its alliance with Germany and join the Allies. The order was given. The Royal Romanian Air Force was now at war with its former mentor, the Luftwaffe. It was a night of confusion, betrayal, and a desperate struggle to secure the airfields. German units stationed in Romania immediately tried to seize the air bases and the refineries. Romanian pilots who had shared drinks with German flyers the night before now took off to shoot them down. The IAR-80s were scrambled to intercept German Ru-52 transports trying to land paratroopers. It was a civil war in the clouds, as the former Allies turned their guns on one another. The transition was a logistical nightmare as the Romanians had to purge their German equipment. However, they couldn't simply throw away their Bf-109s and Hinkels. They still needed them to fight. Also, they flew their German planes against the Germans, leading to chaotic friendly fire incidents. Soviet anti-aircraft gunners, now technically Allies, often shot at any 109 they saw, regardless of markings. The red, yellow, and blue roundel was quickly repainted to match the Soviet Alliance star, or new markings. Romanian units were integrated into the Soviet air armies, a bitter pill for many anti-communist pilots. They were sent to fight over Hungary and Czechoslovakia, supporting the Red Army's drive to Berlin. The war had changed its face, but for the pilots the goal remained the same: survive. Fighting against the Luftwaffe was a shock to the system for the Romanian veterans. They knew the German tactics better than anyone, having been trained by them for 3 years. Romanian 19s engaged German Focke-Wulf 190s in some of the most intense dogfights of the war. The familiarity with enemy equipment gave the Romanians a slight edge in these final bloody battles. The final months of the war saw the Romanian Air Force operating in a world of scarcity. Fuel was short, ammunition was rare, and the Soviets viewed their new allies with deep suspicion. Many Romanian pilots were grounded or arrested as the Soviet political officers began to take control. The once proud Regal Air Force was slowly being dismantled from within by its new friends. By the time Berlin fell, the Royal Romanian Air Force had completed over 8,000 combat missions. They had served on both sides of the greatest conflict in human history, often at the same time. The losses were staggering, with hundreds of pilots and thousands of aircraft gone forever. But their legacy was etched in the vapor trails over the Carpathian Mountains and the Black Sea. After the war, the new communist government saw the IAR-80 as a symbol of the old monarchy. The remaining aircraft were ordered to be scrapped, their metal melted down for industrial use. It was a systematic attempt to erase the memory of Romanian engineering and national defiance. Today, the fact that no original IAR-80 exists is a tragedy for world aviation history. However, the story of these planes lives on in the yellowed photographs and flight logs of the survivors. We remember the IAR-80 not just as a machine, but as the soul of a nation that refused to be small. It was a fighter that looked a superpower in the eye and refused to blink. Sleek lines remain a testament to what a dedicated group of engineers can achieve against the odds. The German Bf-109s in Romanian service also left an indelible mark on the history of the 109 itself. Some of the highest-scoring non-German aces of the war were the men of the Romanian Air Force. They pushed the airframe to its limits, defending their homes with a ferocity that surprised the world. The Gustav was their sword, and they wielded it with surgical, lethal precision until the very end. We must also honor the bomber crews who flew the Heinkels and Savoyas into the mouth of hell. They didn't have the speed of the fighters to save them. They only had their courage and their guns. Through the flak of Stalingrad and the storms of the Caucasus, they delivered their payloads. They were the heavy hammers of the Romanian state, striking at the heart of the enemy's power. The Stuka pilots, too, earned their place in the pantheon of aviation legends. To dive nearly vertical into a storm of lead requires a level of nerves that few humans possess. They were the ultimate protectors of the Romanian soldier in the muddy trenches of the East. The scream of their sirens was the final sound many enemies heard before the end. Even the transport pilots in their Ru-52s and Savoyas played a role that was often overlooked. They flew mercy missions into the pocket of Stalingrad to bring out the wounded and the dying. They landed on frozen, shell-pitted strips under constant artillery fire to save their comrades. Their war was one of heavy lifting and quiet bravery, away from the glory of the dogfights. The story of Romanian aircraft is a story of diversity and the triumph of the human spirit. It shows how a nation can build an air force from the ground up, using both its own mind and foreign tech. It is a story of switching sides not out of cowardice, but out of a desperate need to save the people. The Romanian airmen were caught in a storm they didn't start, but they navigated it with honor. Let us look back at the IAR-37 and 38, the humble biplanes that started the war for Romania. They were slow, archaic, and looked like they belonged in a museum, even in 1941. Yet, they flew the first missions, mapping the way for the faster planes to follow. They proved that it is not the machine that makes the warrior, but the warrior that makes the machine. The Pet-Thes 63.11, with its French elegance, was a rare sight on the brutal Eastern Front. It was a plane of glass and thin metal, designed for a different kind of war in the West. Romanian pilots used its excellent visibility to spot Soviet tank movements during the summer heat. When parts ran out, these planes became icons of a lost era of aviation. The Black Sea was the graveyard for many Romanian aircraft, both fighters and bombers. The Air Sea Rescue units used Heinkel 114 seaplanes to pull down pilots from the freezing waves. These slow-bobbing aircraft were often targeted by Soviet fighters as they performed their rescues. Saving a life was as dangerous as taking one in the contested waters of the Crimean coast. The Hinchel 123, a biplane dive bomber, was another ancient aircraft used by Romania. It was so rugged that it could take off from a swamp and land on a plowed field. Romanian pilots used its psychological impact to break Soviet infantry charges in the early days. The thump-thump of its radial engine was a reliable sound in a world of mechanical failure. The diversity of the fleet meant that a Romanian airbase looked like an international airport. You might see a British-built Hurricane, captured or bought before the war, sitting near a German 109. This variety created a unique culture among the pilots, who shared tips on how to handle different wings. They were the most technically versatile pilots in the world, shifting between different cockpits with ease. We cannot forget the women of the White Squadron, the female pilots who flew medical evacuations. In their small RWD-13 planes, they flew into the heart of combat zones to rescue the wounded. They were unarmed and unescorted, relying on the Red Cross painted on their wings for protection. They were the angels of the Romanian Air Force, bringing hope to those in the darkest places. The White Squadron proved that bravery in the air knows no gender or political boundary. These women flew thousands of missions, often landing under direct fire to pick up a single soldier. Their planes were fragile, made of wood and fabric, yet they survived the harshest combat conditions. They are a vital, beautiful part of the complex legacy of Romanian aviation in World War II. As the Soviet red tide rose, the Romanian Air Force became a force of desperate last stands. Every village and bridge became a focal point for a small group of IR-80s or Stukas. They fought to give the ground troops time to retreat, sacrificing themselves for their brothers. The courage shown in these final losing battles was some of the greatest of the entire war. The defense of Bucharest in 1944 was the final test for the indigenous IAR-80 fighters. As German bombers tried to level the city, the aging fighters rose one last time to defend their homes. Against the more modern German planes, the IAR-80 pilots used their maneuverability to survive. They proved that even an obsolete plane is a deadly weapon in the hands of a man defending his family. When the war finally ended, many Romanian pilots faced a grim future in Soviet-controlled Romania. The heroes of the Eastern Front were often branded as class enemies by the new regime. Their medals were taken, and their stories were buried under decades of propaganda and silence. But the truth of their skill and their sacrifice could not be hidden forever in the archives. Today, we look at the blueprints of the IAR-80 and see a masterpiece of industrial design. It was a plane that shouldn't have been possible for a country with Romania's resources. It represents the golden age of Romanian aviation, a time when they stood among the giants. The spirit of the IAR-80 lives on in every modern Romanian pilot who takes to the sky. The Romanian Air Force's combat record is a testament to the fact that size isn't everything. A medium-sized nation with a clear vision and a skilled population can change the course of a war. From the oil of Ploești to the streets of Prague, Romanian wings left their mark on history. They were the unsung gladiators of the European theater, fighting with heart and iron. Let us imagine a young pilot in 1941 looking at the Michael's cross on his wing for the first time. He doesn't know the war will take him to the edge of the world and back again. He only knows that his engine is humming and the sky is calling him to defend his land. That innocent courage is the foundation upon which the entire history of the Air Force was built. The IAR-81 dive bombers were the sledgehammers of the Romanian infantry during the advance. They would loiter over the battlefield, waiting for the radio call to strike a hidden Soviet battery. When the call came, the roar of the no-brain engine would signal the start of the dive. The accuracy they achieved saved countless Romanian lives on the ground during the push into Russia. During the retreat from Stalingrad, the Romanian Air Force performed miracles of logistics. They flew in fuel and ammunition to surrounded units, often under the guns of Soviet tanks. They were the only link to the outside world for thousands of men trapped in the Kessel. The sight of a Romanian transport plane through the blizzard was the only hope many soldiers had. The Messerschmitt Bf-110 G2 South were used as night fighters in the final stages of the defense. Without advanced radar, Romanian pilots had to rely on searchlights and their own eyes to find bombers. They flew into the pitch-black sky to hunt the RAF and Soviet bombers that struck at night. It was a lonely, terrifying form of combat, where the ground was as much an enemy as the air. The PED-63, 11 South were eventually relegated to training roles as they became too slow for combat. But even in the schools, they taught a generation of Romanian pilots the basics of twin-engine flight. The French design was elegant, with a cockpit that felt like a balcony overlooking the world. Every pilot who flew one remembered its smooth controls and its fragile, glass-filled nose. The Savoia Marchetti SM-79 Sparviero remained a workhorse until the very last day of the war. Its 3 engines gave it a level of safety that the twin-engine bombers simply couldn't match. Romanian crews used them to drop paratroopers behind enemy lines in daring nighttime operations. The Hunchback was a clumsy-looking plane, but it had the heart of a lion in the heat of battle. Captured Soviet Yaks were often used as aggressor aircraft to train new Romanian pilots. Veterans would fly the Yaks to show the rookies exactly how the enemy would attack them. This realistic training was the reason Romanian kill ratios remained high even as they were outnumbered. They studied the enemy so closely that they became the enemy in their own training exercises. The IAR-80's radial engine was a licensed version of the no-brain 14K Mistral Major. It was a reliable, air-cooled beast that could take a bullet and keep the propeller turning. This reliability was critical on the Eastern Front, where a forced landing usually meant capture or death. The sound of that 14-cylinder engine was the heartbeat of the Romanian fighter force for 4 years. By 1945, the Royal Romanian Air Force had transitioned from German to Soviet equipment. The Michael's Cross was replaced by a red star with a small Romanian tricolor in the center. They were now flying the very yaks and low-fave south they had spent years trying to shoot down. It was a strange final chapter for the men who had once been the masters of the Bf-109. The legacy of the Romanian Air Force is not just found in the victories, but in the losses. Every empty hangar and every missing pilot told a story of a nation that gave everything it had. They were caught between ideologies and empires, trying to find a path that kept their country alive. The aircraft were the instruments of that survival, the steel wings of a people in turmoil. We remember the names of the pilots, but we must also remember the names of the planes. The IAR-80, the Gustav, the Stuka, the Sparviro. These were the names that ruled the Romanian sky. They were machines made of oil and metal, but they were animated by the souls of the men inside. To tell the story of one is to tell the story of the other, forever linked in history. The courage of the Romanian airmen during the tidal wave raids is a story for the ages. Facing the most powerful air force in the world, they rose to meet the challenge with obsolete gear. They proved that tactical skill and home field advantage could offset the might of an industrial giant. The American crews who survived those raids never forgot the tenacity of the Romanian fighters. The Flying Pencil Dorniers ended their service as weathered, oil-stained veterans of 1,000 miles. They had seen the sun rise over the Caspian Sea and set over the ruins of Bucharest. They were the quiet observers of the war, recording the movements of millions from the clouds. Their photos remain a silent, black-and-white witness to the scale of the conflict on the East. The Henschel 129 pilots were the Iron Men of the Air Force, flying at eye level with the enemy. They felt the shock waves of their own cannons as they shredded the armor of Soviet tanks. They were the last line of defense against the armored spearheads that eventually overran the nation. Their bravery was a desperate heavy metal symphony played out over the fields of Romania. As the post-war silence fell over the airfields, the ghosts of the IR-80s seemed to linger. The technology moved on to jets and missiles, leaving the props and pistons of the 1940s behind. But the lessons of Romanian aviation, ingenuity, adaptability, and bravery remained relevant. The nation rebuilt its wings, but it never forgot the golden age of the Royal Air Force. Today, museums around the world hold pieces of the planes that flew in Romanian colors, a cockpit here, an engine there, a fragment of a yellow cross found in a forest in Ukraine. These relics are the only physical evidence left of a war that defined a generation of Romanians. They are the silent testimony to the skill of the engineers and the courage of the pilots. Let us honor the pilots who climbed into IAR-80 cockpits to face the American bomber streams. Let us honor the crews who flew Stukas through the black clouds of Soviet anti-aircraft fire. Let us honor the transport pilots who evacuated the wounded under the guns of the enemy. They served their nation through history's most turbulent period with a grace that is rare. The aircraft they flew were more than just machines. They were the vehicles of experience. Through the glass of a Heinkel or the canopy of a 109, they saw the world change forever. They experienced the terror of the dive and the glory of the victory in the same afternoon. These planes deserve their place in the complex, heroic, and tragic legacy of World War II. Romania's air power was a flash of brilliance in a dark time, a story of national defiance. When we look at the sky today, we can still hear the phantom echo of a radial engine over Brasov. The story of the Royal Romanian Air Force is a story of wings that refuse to be broken. It is a legacy of steel and spirit that will fly forever in the memory of a grateful nation.